What do you do when you are constantly pushed toward perfection imposed by others and your voice gets lost under their expectations? Today, on the Stories with Agnes channel, I will tell you Claudia's story, a story about pain, loss, and struggle. Stay until the end, as you might find a part of yourself in these lines. I don't know what your parents are like, but mine never accepted half measures. It always had to be more, better, higher. I had to push beyond every limit, even when I felt like I was drowning. For them, success was an obligation, not a choice. My brother Antonio had already succeeded. He was in college, his first year of engineering. Meanwhile, I, still in 10th grade, was struggling between the pages of textbooks, torn between the fear of failure and the need to please my parents. I studied to the point of exhaustion, until the letters started dancing on the page, until fatigue became my second name. But nothing was ever enough. When Antonio left, I felt like my only anchor had been cut. The house became an empty, cold place where the echo of my parents' expectations reverberated in my mind like a hammer. That's when it all began. A dull anxiety, a pressure in my chest that wouldn't let me breathe. Day after day, that feeling grew, suffocating me, slowly destroying me. A faceless fear, without a clear reason but always there. Every morning I told myself I had to be strong, but the truth was that I was falling apart. No one saw it. No one knew. I was just the girl who was good at school, the girl who had to succeed. But inside, I felt like I was exploding. There was a moment when I wanted to disappear, to escape everything, to stop feeling, to stop hearing. But in the midst of the deepest abyss, I began to ask myself, is this really what I want? Is this what I deserve? That's how the fight began. With myself, with my thoughts, with all the shadows that had taken over me, it wasn't easy. It was a long road, filled with tears and days when I could barely get out of bed. But step by step, I began to see the light. I began to allow myself to breathe. I realized that I didn't have to live to fulfill others' dreams, but for myself. My father was a captain in the army, a man of iron, always upright, always imposing but silent. A man who carried his battles not only on the training field but also at home, where he was always called to order. My mother, she didn't wear a uniform or have medals, but she had a sharp voice and a gaze that brooked no hesitation. She worked as a saleswoman at the local store, but deep in her heart, she carried a profound dissatisfaction, a thirst for more. I don't know exactly what she wanted to be. Maybe a doctor, maybe an artist, maybe just someone else. But what I do know is that when her dreams failed, when reality became too narrow for her, she chose to live through us. We had to be what she couldn't be. We had to carry the flag forward, to be proof that her sacrifices hadn't been in vain. And it wasn't just that we had to succeed, we had to be an example for everyone. The whole neighborhood had to know. The neighbors, relatives, the bread seller, and the mailman had to hear it. My husband, a captain in the army, my son in college, an engineer, my daughter at the best high school. She boasted about us as if we were trophies, not people. But behind this spectacle, behind the words full of praise, was a pressure that crushed us. For her, nothing was ever enough. My father worked hard in the army, but that wasn't enough. When he came home, my mother always found something else for him to do. Fix this, paint that, carry this, go there, don't stop. Because in her world, anyone who rested was weak. Anyone who didn't work to exhaustion was a failure. And we weren't allowed to be any different. We weren't allowed to be tired, to make mistakes, to say, I can't. Because it wasn't about us. It was about her. About her pride. About the image she had to keep impeccable. But what do you do when you end up living only to avoid shaming someone else? When you no longer know who you are, what you want, or what you feel? For years, I struggled with this burden, with the feeling that I always had to be better, stronger, more successful. With the fear that if I failed, it wasn't just me who would fall, but also the image my mother had built with such determination. But one day, I realized something. The life I'm living isn't hers. It isn't anyone else's. It's mine, and I have the right to live it my way. Not for applause, not for the neighbors' praise, not for my parents' pride. For me. It was an evening like any other. Another Friday spent among books and notebooks, with the letters dancing on the page in the dim light of the lamp. A rare moment of peace, because my mother was at work. Only my father and I were home. It was a break from the shouting, from the pressure, from her relentless desire to push us further. I remember feeling strangely relieved. I prepared dinner, something simple, just for the two of us. I thought we'd eat together, that maybe, for the first time in a long while, we'd have a moment just for us. But when I called him, he didn't answer. I searched the house. Nothing. Then I saw the attic door slightly open, a door that usually remained closed. My stomach tightened, but I tried not to think anything bad. Maybe he had just gone up to fix something. "Dad?" I called again, climbing the narrow stairs. A heavy, oppressive silence, like a void swallowing any sound. When I reached the top, I saw him, a silhouette suspended in the dim light, a body hanging, inert, swaying slightly. My eyes widened in horror. My heart froze in my chest. "Number no! Dad!" I screamed, a piercing howl, a sound I never thought my voice could make. He was there, hung by a rope tied to an old beam. His feet were bare, slightly bent, as if he had tried to grasp something that was no longer there. His hands were limp by his sides. And his face. A fixed, glassy stare, bulging eyes, a purplish blue hue. His mouth slightly open, as if he had wanted to say something before he left. My legs gave out. I fell to my knees, trembling, trying to breathe, but the air refused to fill my lungs anymore. The world collapsed around me, and all I could do was scream. My scream shattered the silence of the attic, a sound that would never be forgotten. I tried to move, to do something, anything, but my body refused to obey. I struggled to my feet and ran, almost falling down the stairs, rushed out into the street screaming, calling for help. The neighbors came. They went up, and then, they too were engulfed by the same silence. Mom arrived home shortly after. I don't know if she immediately understood what had happened, but when she saw him, she collapsed beside me, screaming, pulling her hair, scratching her face with her nails. But it no longer mattered. Dad was gone. The man who had worked himself to exhaustion, who had never said "I can't" anymore, who had carried his burden in silence, had given up. I wished I had seen him, heard him, saved him, but I couldn't. No one could. And since then, every time I close my eyes, I see him there, hanging, with his eyes open, looking at me, but not seeing me anymore. I don't remember who called the police or the ambulance. The neighbors, probably. Or maybe it was Mom when she got home and realized what had happened. But it was too late anyway. Dad was gone. He had left for another world, one where perhaps he no longer had to fight. Then came the funeral. Everything was like a bad dream from which I couldn't wake up. Sad faces, whispered words, candles burning without caring about our pain. My brother Antonio came in haste, the only person with whom I felt I could still breathe, but he was broken too. I could see him trying to be strong for me, but his eyes told a different story. Mom wasn't crying. She hadn't collapsed in grief as you might expect. No, she was angry. She blamed Dad. How could he do this to us? What a coward. What a selfish man. Her voice cut through my soul like a cold knife. She said nothing about how he had been overwhelmed, about how she had pushed him to the edge of the abyss. She didn't even consider for a moment that perhaps she was the one who had put the rope around his neck, with every absurd expectation, every pressure, every reproach. I cried. I cried until I thought I had no more tears, but they kept flowing, day after day, night after night. Then Antonio left, and I was left alone, me and Mom. Mom, who, as if nothing had happened, resumed her life. She continued to boast around the neighborhood as if the world hadn't found out that her husband had taken his own life. As if that didn't matter. And between boasting about her engineer son and her daughter at the elite high school, she kept blaming Dad. He shamed us. If he were a real man, he wouldn't have done this. I worked and sacrificed myself, and he gave up like a weakling. Every word was a punch to my chest. Every sentence plunged me deeper into a darkness from which I didn't know if I would ever emerge. I was lost. Mornings were empty. Days had no meaning. Nights were nightmares where I saw him again and again hanging, looking at me with those same bulging, lifeless eyes. I tried to hold on to something, anything. School, my friends, but nothing mattered anymore. Nothing brought me joy anymore. For the first time in my life, I understood what he had felt. For the first time, I felt how easy it is to slip into emptiness, how hard it is to find a reason to keep going. But somehow, I was still there. I didn't know for how long. I didn't know if I would ever find my way back. But one way or another, I was still breathing, and I wondered, how much longer could I keep it up? Time passed. I told myself I was healing, that the deep wound in my soul was starting to close. But in reality, I had only learned to hide it, to smile mechanically, to say fine when someone asked how I was. But at night, when I was alone with my thoughts, everything came back. The emptiness, the pain, my mother's voice blaming my father and making me feel trapped between guilt and anger. I knew I couldn't go on like this. I needed help. When I told my mother I wanted to see a psychologist, she laughed scornfully. Nonsense. They'll take your money and tell you what you already know. In life, you have to be strong, not complain. But I was tired. Tired of being strong for others. Tired of hiding what I felt. So I went. And it was hard, talking about my father, about that night, about how alone and lost I felt. But it was also liberating. For the first time, someone listened without judging. Without telling me what I should have done. Without blaming my father. Without telling me to move on. The psychologist didn't give me magical solutions. They didn't erase my pain with a sponge, but they showed me that it was normal to feel what I was feeling, that I wasn't broken, that it wasn't my fault. Over time, I began to distance myself from my mother. Not because I didn't love her, but because I couldn't bear her oppressive presence anymore. The coldness between us grew, but I no longer had the strength to try to change it. When I finished 10th grade, I knew I had to leave. Anything, just not to stay there. I enrolled in the Faculty of Letters without asking for her opinion, without seeking her approval. It was the first decision I made just for myself. When I left, I felt like I was breathing for the first time in years. In the dormitory, it was a different world. My classmates had other thoughts, other dreams, other ways of looking at life. They didn't care about what the neighbors said. They didn't live under the weight of a perfect image. I felt like slowly I was thawing, like I was learning to laugh again. Now I'm in my 3rd year, and I know that soon I'll have to decide what comes next. But one thing is certain, I don't want to go back home. Maybe it's not normal. Maybe in an ideal world I should want to be there to repair my relationship with my mother, but I can't. Because for the first time I feel like I'm living, and I don't want to lose that again. Life has taught me, through the most painful experience, that sometimes the pressure of expectations can become an unbearable burden. That the desire not to disappoint, to please others, can push us into darkness. I spent years trying to be what others wanted me to be, without asking myself what I truly wanted. But in the end, I understood something essential. Life is not about fulfilling others' dreams. It's not about being the trophy that our parents can proudly show to the world. Life is about you. About what you feel, about what you want, about the path you choose to follow. If you too are struggling with others' expectations, if you feel like you no longer know who you are in this race toward imposed perfection, I'll tell you one thing. Walk your own path. You are not a trophy. You are a person, and you deserve to live for yourself. This was Claudia's story. A story about loss, pain, but also about rediscovery. What would you have done in her place? Would you have chosen to go back? Or would you continue to search for your own path? Write to me in the comments. I want to hear your story too. See you soon with more captivating stories on the Storytelling with Agnes channel. Don't forget to subscribe to discover more inspiring stories.